A love note from a very famous musician to his wife. How about a hint that the recording artist and producer were doing tons of drugs as they were making the album, and even something that eerily predicted one of the most tragic events in U.S. history. All of these and more can be found as secret messages on album covers, and today we're going to be talking about 10 of them. Hey, I'm Richard Maddow. This is for people who love music, and that's you. So let's get right to album cover number one of the greatest albums of all time, Revolver by the Beatles. And what a fantastic cover. That cover was actually drawn by their friend, the bass player, the German bass player, Klaus Voormann. He went on to play on some of the Beatles solo projects. He was with George Harrison on the famous Concert for Bangladesh. But he was also a great artist, and he drew the cover to Revolver. Now, like most artists do, he wanted to sign the album, so what did he do? He snuck in his signature and a little photo of him, very small, in George Harrison's hair. Let's zoom in and you can see there it is, Klaus Voormann and his picture, giving himself a little credit for drawing the album cover. Okay, let's go to 1976, 10 years after Revolver. Boston has their debut album. They came on the scene with a really different sound. Brad Delp and Tom Schultz, they just had a cool thing going on. And unlike most bands, on their debut album, they didn't put their photos on the cover. They just had this spaceship. It was like their logo, but it said actually something more, because turn the spaceship upside down, look carefully, and what do you see? That's right, it's an acoustic guitar. You're seeing it kind of from the bottom end on back. Look at that. What a cool logo and a great little trick from the Boston debut album. Let's go back in time now, 1969, to those crazy, what do you even call them? Rock and roll, jazz, bluegrass, Americana, country, jam band. They created a whole genre of music. Yes, of course I'm talking about the Grateful Dead and their psychedelic masterpiece called Oxymoxoa. Now, do you get the feeling there was a little bit of LSD involved during the making of this album? Well, some people say that if you look at the words Grateful Dead on the album cover and fill in some things here and there in all the right places, it says, ate the acid. I don't think there's much question that the Grateful Dead were eating some acid as they were recording this album. So really cool album too, and a nice little hit. Let's stick with the Grateful Dead. We'll fast forward about 5 years, 1974, another classic, Grateful Dead, From the Mars Hotel. It's not a live album. There actually is no Mars Hotel, but that's what they call this fantastic album. Unfortunately, around the time this album was being recorded, there were some rumors that Jerry Garcia had passed away. Fortunately, it wasn't true. He still had another 20 plus years on the planet. But just to address those rumors, on the album cover, there's something that looks like just gibberish or some design. You can't really see what it is. But turn the album upside down, put it in a mirror, and you can see exactly what it says. Ugly rumors. And they certainly were ugly rumors, and fortunately not true. Okay, let's go from the Dead to a little bit of hip-hop. The Beastie Boys, their 1986 debut, Licensed to Ill, had a picture of an airplane on there. And like most airplanes, it has the, I don't know, like the license number of the airplane, 3MTA3. Well, what the heck does that mean? Were they just some random numbers chosen by the Beach Boys, by the Beastie Boys? Well, put it in a mirror, and you'll see a little hidden and somewhat immature message from the Beastie Boys. Hey, it was their first album. Let's give them a break. The message was simply, eat me. All right. Let's move back to 1967, the Rolling Stones. As we all know, that was the year that the Beatles' classic Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album came out. What a cool cover that was. All kinds of historic figures and great musicians. Bob Dylan was on the cover, of course. There was a little Shirley Temple doll on the side of the album, dressed in a sweater that said, "Welcome the Rolling Stones." The Stones and the Beatles had kind of a friendly rivalry. A lot of people thought that the Stones were just a couple steps behind the Beatles. And sure enough, 6 months later, they come out with their psychedelic album, their Satanic Majesty's Request. Really cool album. Didn't get great reviews when it came out. Maybe hasn't aged all that well, but it's a really fun listen to take you back to that era, 1967. Well, just like the Beatles throw a little tribute to the Stones on their album, the Stones wanted to return the favor to the Beatles. Now, when this album first came out, the album was actually made of that glass prism 3D material. So when you looked at it and turned it a little bit, it was a 3D image, and Mick Jagger turned his head, and there were all kinds of crazy things going on. Buried in that image, very small, the four heads of the Beatles. So the Stones were mentioned on the Beatles album, then the Stones actually put the Beatles on their album. Okay, speaking of the Beatles, let's go to 1971. The Beatles were kind of fresh from their breakup, and McCartney recorded one of his absolute best albums, Ram. Incredible solo album. McCartney was married to Linda McCartney, Linda Eastman, before they got married, in one of the great rock and roll marriages of all time. And he wanted to leave her a little secret message on this somewhat childish-looking album cover. So he wrote the four letters, L-I-L-Y. Linda, I love you. Wow, what a nice, sweet little message. Most of these hidden messages and backwards songs you hear about are all satanic and ugly, so really great to see something that nice from obviously one of the greatest musical artists of all time. Okay, let's fast forward quite a bit to 2005. Kate Bush. She was never really that huge in the US, but superstar in the UK and much of Europe. She was also kind of odd. She didn't like to get on planes, and she took a long time between albums. Her album Ariel from 2005 was her first album after a break of over 10 years. And look at the cover. Really beautiful cover. It looks like a body of water with a reflection of some rocks. It's really hard to tell what they are. But look really closely. If you do anything in the audio world, you'll know this looks like a waveform. This is what mapped out sounds look like. And a Kate Bush fan went so far as to actually analyze this and figure out that it was the sound, this was the waveform that represented the sound of a blackbird singing. And sure enough, on side 4, it was a double album, what we would call side 4 of the album, there was the sound of a blackbird chirping. So really cool secret message there. Okay, let's stay in the UK. Go to one of the great bands, Supertramp. They had some fantastic albums, Crime of the Century, my personal favorite, Even in the Quietest Moment. But their big breakthrough in the US was their 1979 album called Breakfast in America. And the album paid quite a tribute to the US. You can see that diner waitress holding the tray. She's dressed as the Statue of Liberty, representing the Statue of Liberty. And then, of course, there's the New York skyline in the background. But look closely at the skyline, and you can see it's made of things you would find at a diner. Salt and pepper shakers, a little coffee creamer. So wow, very cool tribute to America and Americana in Supertramp's album cover, Breakfast in America. But it gets a little weirder. Flip the album, put it in a mirror, and then if you zoom in on the part of the artwork that represents the Twin Towers and crop it just so, you can see the Twin Towers are falling, and the letters in Supertramp say 9/11. That's really weird, isn't it? Now, this was 1979. How could they have possibly predicted the fall of the Twin Towers? It's so eerie. It's so creepy. And in my opinion, of course, it's such a strange coincidence. There's no way they could have predicted this would have happened many years later. So why am I putting in this video? Because it's a little warning. Sometimes in our eagerness and zest to find little clues and hints and interpret things, we go a little bit overboard, and they can seem really real. So I think a lot of secret messages on album covers, in songs, backwards masking, were they always the intent of the artist? Well, maybe not always. Okay, let's go into our last secret message in an album cover. Again, a Beatle is involved. Beatles were great fans of secret messages, weren't they? This is Harry Nilsson's solo album from 1974, Pussycats, and it was produced by none other than John Lennon. And this was not the best era for Lennon. He was hanging out in LA, and he and Harry Nilsson and a lot of these other musicians were just engaging in drunken debauchery and drugs, and Lennon referred to this whole era as his lost weekend. Not the best time for them. And Nilsson actually blew out his vocal cords making this album. So A lot of struggles there. And they were doing a ton of drugs, probably to their detriment. And they wanted to leave a little hint. Now, as you can see, the album's very innocent looking. They're dressed in these weird, childish costumes. But look under the table, and what do you see? There's a rug. And on one side of the rug, the letter D. On the other side of the rug, the letter S. Put it together. D, rug, S. D-R-U-G-S. Drugs. And many people thought it meant drugs under the table because, of course, that's how they were getting their drugs back in the 70s. Crazy stuff. Well, there you have it. 10 albums with hidden messages right on the album covers. Please feel free to comment if you like what you're hearing. Push the subscribe button. There's lots more stuff to come. I'm Richard Maddow. This is for people who love music. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you soon.